Hello, I'm Alice Hutchinson, the owner of Birds Books, an independent bookstore in Bethel, Connecticut, and I am honored to be the host of Write America. The aim of this series is to help set the country on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. Write America is a literary series created by author Roger Rosenblatt, featuring award-winning and nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers in readings and conversations each week about how books and art might bridge the deep divisions in our nation. Write America celebrates the quiet power of art in our lives, the unifying power of the highest uses of language. In novels, stories, essays, and poems, we recognize one another as parts of the human family, one family. Roger Rosenblatt, the creator of Write America, puts it this way: writing makes justice desirable, evil intelligible, grief endurable, and love possible. So welcome, and please join us every Monday evening at this time as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in the country read from their works and talk to each other, and with you, in an effort to bring us together. If you missed last week's episode with Carl Phillips, Kai Coggin, and Lloyd Schwartz, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Birds Books Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can go back and rewatch. Tonight, Birds Books hosts a reading by and conversation with Major Jackson, Lee Herrick, and Frank Bidart. I will return after the readings to bring your questions and comments to the authors. For those of you unfamiliar with Crowdcast, many of you have already discovered the chat to the right of the screen. That's where you can make any comment you like, any kind of accolades that you might want to give. That's where that happens. But if you have a question, there is a Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen, and that's where I'm going to go at the end of the evening to look for your questions to ask the authors. Also at the bottom of the screen is a Buy Books from Birds Book tab. Please support the work of these authors and our little bookstore by the purchase of a book. Now for our first speaker. Major Jackson is the author of 5 books of poetry, including The Absurd Man, Roll Deep and Holding Company, Hoops, and Leaving Saturn, which won the Cave Canem Poetry Prize for First Book of Poems. His edited volumes include Best American Poetry 2019, Renga for Obama, and Library of America's County Cullen Collected Poems. A recipient of fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowments for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Major Jackson has been awarded the Pushcart Prize, a Whiting Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. He has published poems and essays in American Poetry Review, The New Yorker, Paris Review, Plowshares Poetry London, and many other fine publications. Major Jackson lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where he is the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Chair at the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. He serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. We welcome to the screen Major Jackson. Let me pull.
Hello.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Well, what a treat. Are you kidding? My second time in this reading series. It's fantastic. Immense gratitude to Birds Books, Alice, and good pal Roger for once again convening us, what amounts to one of the most important reading series right now in the country, I would argue. And whoa, also happy to read with Lee Herrick and one of my literary heroes, Frank Bidart. I'm going to read a few new poems and some poems from The Absurd Man. I was told I should hold this up, although it doesn't seem like it's the color is washed out. There we go, at an angle. This is a new poem, and while living in Oregon, I had the great pleasure of having a few conversations with the recently departed Barry Lopez, and a few other conversations with him that were enormously memorable for me as a young writer. And this poem emerged today. It's called Of Wolves and Imagination in memory of Barry Lopez. Every so often, one has to make a sound of terrible pain, as though in boundless woods, among thorns and berries prowling through bramble and tangled vines, whose presence is a green fog. One has to leave their candlelit dinners at 11 Madison Park with its white linens sad as milk and silverware tenderly laid out like an embarrassment of torture. And one has to gaze into the chambers of a soon empty heart and return to the kingdom of creatures and give up the measured silence of the respectable, whose desire and gasping breaths dangle as though from a string of floss, all squeaky mirth and nothing more. Every so often, one has to make a sound like a massive season kept in the pocket, like a souvenir for when the temperature changes. The imagination is a matinee of memories with a side of parsley, like this one, nickels tossed into a fountain, then a wish, which is to say, the skies are burning indigo, and your breath can be anything possible, raucous as a church service or the quiet crunch of leaves, earth's golden confetti held between palms. Consider this poem a thumb on a highway looking for work. Okay. Do we all remember Marianne Moore's tricorn hat? I do. Marianne Moore's tricorn hat is performative. Growing up, I knew many a hard hearted man who would as likely join a carnival than tell their own children they loved them. Such are the mountains we climb, as though they were assigned their own stony peak, and we were doomed for the rest of our days to stand at the base of a trail towered and perplexed. I am the grandson of a man who treasured hats, and thus I, too, sport ivy wool caps and fedoras with sleek, gross grain bands and burgundy flowers that torch the side of a trilby like a leaf in autumn. But it's true, I prefer cashmere silk blends from Italy, particularly Naples, where one can buy a Silatino, then sip an espresso at a cafe mornings in the streets. My grandfather was less a mountain and more a butte. That distance makes all the difference to a young kid. In addition to hats, thanks to him, I treasure jazz, who, a friend once said, was overrated. I stopped being his friend. My grandfather took me one evening to a concert as a surprise. B.B. King playing his Lucille, which was the name of my grandmother. So it was nice to see two men growing up wail about a woman, which was his silent way of saying the soul breaks, an affection that bombs you to smithereens, but that touch of sweetness not wasted in some grand fashion like a bellow of war, or as the kids say, performative. And even though I like hats that I can sport occasionally, like a steeple, I feel most like a continent when I am open as a freeway at night, just rain and wind slashing across my highways, so that I become a cyclone of feeling, even though you cannot see my eyes below the brim. Those were two new poems. Now I'm going to read two poems from this book and then pass the mic. um, Here is, it is autumn, is it not? And I wrote this poem maybe about 6 years ago. Its early incarnation was standing one beautiful autumnal evening, late afternoon is evening in Vermont. It's called Thinking of Frost. I thought by now my reverence would have waned, matured to the temperate silence of the bookish, or revealed how blasé I've grown with age, but the unrestrained joy I feel when a black skein of geese voyages like a dropped string from God, slowly shifting, when the decayed apples of an orchard amass beneath its trees like Eve's first party, when driving, and the road Vanna whites its crops of corn, whose stalks will soon give way to a harvester's blade and turn the land to a man's unruly face, makes me believe I will never soothe the pagan in me, nor exhibit the proprietary of the polite. After a few moons, I'm loud this time of year, unseemly as a chevron of honking. I'm fire in the leaves, as streperous as a New England farmer. I see fear in the eyes of his children who walk home from school as evening falls like an advance trickle of bats, the sky pungent as bounty and chimney smoke. I read the scowl below the smiles of parents at my son's soccer game, their agitation, the figure of wind yellow leaves make of quaking aspens. And finally, this poem, which features a dear friend, uh, another poet named Matthew Dickman. The Romantics of Franconia Notch. Matthew Dickman and I are fond of resurrecting the spotted faces of state troopers and small town police we've met over the years. We love their melodrama, the way they pilled their aviators in the rear view of my Jetta as they approached the car like shy teenagers on a first date, then doff their stiff brim hats with yellow braids. There was the pastel-loving cop in Eugene, fond of Art Deco motels in South Beach, and the comic book fan in Littleton, New Hampshire, who unlatched his gun holster, and the one tormented by Goethe's propositions and thus led us, choral-like, through a few hymns before issuing a roadside warning in Randolph, Vermont. When they asked us where are we going, we almost always respond to the town square, of course, to give the part back to the wretched men and their brown bags of sorrows and needles, which turned them to black puddles. We want the crime squad to know we have a purpose, that we sugar our hopes with the honeyed lines of Brodsky and Pessoa and Thoreau, whom we were declaiming just that moment, zipping in the dark past low-lit colonials, when a black bear jumped out as though chased by the ghost of the bear he used to be, and Matthew turned up Jay-Z's Black Album so he'd get a boost and lurch into further darkness. Thank you for listening to those 4 poems.
Thank you, Major. We'll see you on the other side. Our next speaker is born in Daejeon, South Korea, and adopted at 10 months old. Lee Herrick grew up in California. He is the author of poetry collections Scar and Flower, Gardening Secrets of the Dead, and This Many Miles from Desire. His poems have appeared in many literary magazines and anthology, including Bloomsbury Review, Ziziva, Highway 99, A Literary Journey Through California's Great Central Valley, One for the Money, The Sentences Poetic Form, and Invisible Poems of Social Justice, among others. Poet Brian Turner writes that Herrick's poetry is, quote, Whitman revised with a voice that is politically engaged and rooted in compassion. Gardening Secrets of the Dead is a wise, gorgeous book, close quote. He is co-editor of The World I Leave You, Asian American Poets on Faith and Spirit. From 2015 to 2017, Herrick served as Poet Laureate of Fresno, California. Herrick lives in Fresno and teaches at Fresno City College and in the low residency MFA program at Sierra Nevada College. Please welcome to the screen, Lee Herrick. Let me grab him here. Welcome, Lee.
Hi, thank you, Alice, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Bird's Books. Also, Roger, if you are out there, thank you very much for this reading series. I agree with Major that it's one of, if not the most important reading series currently in the country. And so thank you for having me. It's a great honor and very nice to be reading with Major. That was amazing. And Frank, whose work I can't wait to hear. I'm going to read 4 poems, I think. And as I think Alice mentioned in my bio, I was born in South Korea and adopted to the United States when I was about just under 1 year old. And so this first poem is sort of about that, and then speaks to my birth mother, or my first mother, who I've never met. And these first few poems are from Scar and Flower. So this is called How Music Stays in the Body. Your body is a song called Birth or First Mother, a miracle that gave birth to another exquisite song. One song raises 3 boys with a white husband. One song fought an American war overseas. One song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. Most forgot the lyrics to their own bodies or decided to paint abstracts of mountains or moons in the shape of your face. I've been told mothers don't forget the body. I can't remember your face, the shape or story, or how you held me the day I was born, so I wrote 1,000 poems to survive. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. I want to hear your opinions about angels. Truth is, angels drink too. Soju spilled on the halo, white wings sticky with gin, as if any mother could forget the music that left her. You should hear how loudly I sing now. I've become a ballad of wild dreams and coping mechanisms. I can breathe now through any fire. I imagine I got this from him or you, my earthly inheritance, your arms, your sigh, your heavy song. I know all the lyrics. I know all the blood. I know why angels howl into the moonlight. So a lot of Scar and Flower was written around 2014 to 2017. And in 2014, a lot of the American violence that I'd always been pretty deeply impacted by really came to a boil. In 2014, there was Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old, who was killed by police in Cleveland. Eric Garner was killed, choked in Staten Island, and Michael Brown in Ferguson was shot by the police. And then in 2016, the Orlando nightclub shooting at the Pulse nightclub. So I was writing a lot about this kind of violence. So I wanted to read one of those, kind of about the 2014 year. It's called What I Hear When I Hear You in My Head. It's the little whisper, the aggregate sorrow, the father's heavy weeping as the son's heavy weeping. What I hear is your artistic response after the massacre, the family of clasped hands, black hands, brown hands, a small child whose brother never had a chance, who holds her father's tearful face and says, your eyes are like the moon, is what I hear when I hear you in my head this evening, your laughter like tiny harps. I hear your fatigue as another way to say deprivation. I hear recount, retally. A retaliation is what I hear when I hear you in my head is the grace, the charm, the dead, the boy, the dead boy, the boy who died because of the fear, the forest in the other man's heart, the gun. The heartbreak is the sound I hear when I hear you in my head, is how we each sigh with distinction, where fatigue meets fire, where we wake and wonder, if we all go out to a field tonight, sit by a fire, and say the most honest thing you've ever said in your life, would any dead boy or girl reappear? Not like a mirage, but reappear. Not like a voice in my head, but a body in this room, with flesh and bones, with his big smile and orange blossoms in his billowing hair. Okay. And then a little change of pace. The second part of Scar and Flower talks a little bit about navigating the traumas. And I was writing about traveling and just the people you meet and wondering about people's lives and things like that. So this is called Flight. Flight. The in-flight magazine crossword partially done. A corner begun here, scratched out answers there. One set of answers in pencil, another in the green. The woman with the green ballpoint pen knew the all-time hit king is Rose. And the Siem Reap treasure is Angkor Wat. And the woman, perhaps en route to hold her dying mother's hand in Seattle, forgot about death for 10 minutes while remembering her husband's Cincinnati Reds hat while gardening after the diagnosis. Her handwriting was so clean. Maybe she was a surgeon, maybe a painter. No. What painter wouldn't know 17 down? Diego's love, 5 letters. In a rush, her dying mother's voice came back to her, or maybe she was a Chinese adoptee, and her first mother's imagined voice said, "Woe I ni." At 30,000 feet, you focus on 33 across. Asian American classic. The woman. When a stranger in the window seat sees the clue, watches me write in W, and she says, "Warrior." And for a moment, you forget that it is your favorite memoir, and she reminds you of lilies or roses, Van Gogh or stems with thorns, art galleries and romantic cities where she's headed, but you should not go. And the flight attendant grazes my shoulder. The crossword squares, the letters, the chairs and aisles seem so tight in flight, but there's nothing here but room, really. Maybe the next passenger will know what I do not. 64 down, 5 letters, purpose. And why do we remember what we do? We know the buzz of Dickinson's Fly and the number of years in Marquez's Solitude, but some things we will never know, as it should be. Why the body sometimes rumbles like a plane hurtling over Southern Oregon. How exactly we fall in love, or if Frida and Maxine Hong Kingston would have loved the same kind of tea. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Lee, thank you so much. I'll see you in a few minutes. Our third speaker, Frank Bidart, is the author of 11 collections of poetry, including Metaphysical Dog, Watching the Spring Festival, Stardust, Desire, and the Western Night, collected poems 1965 to 1990. His honors include the Wallace Stevens Awards, the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Foundation Writers Award, the Morton Dowen Zabel Award given by the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Shelley Award of the Poetry Society of America, a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Paris Review's first Bernard F. Connors Prize for the War of Václav Nijinsky in 1981. In 2007, he received the Bollingen Prize in American Poetry. He has also won the National Book Critics Circle Award. His book, Half-Light, Collected Poems 1965 to 2016, won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize and the 2017 National Book Award. And his latest book, Against Silence, Against Silence, just came out last week. And I'm going to have Frank hold his own book cover up since ours is in a box showing up tomorrow. He lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Please welcome to the screen, Frank Bidart. Let me snag you here, Frank. Thank you.
Hello. Alice asked me to hold the book up. Here it is. It's got a very beautiful cover by Joe Brainerd. And, well, it's called Against Silence. I'm going to read 3 poems. The first is called At the Shore. All over the earth, elegies for the earth. The shore is in mourning. It mourns what it must soon see, the sea rising, implacable, drowning chunks of the intelligible, familiar world. Creatures of the earth, filled with the instinct to wound the earth. We fear that by an act of immense unconscious will, we have succeeded at last in killing nature. Since childhood, I hated the illusion that this green and pleasant land inherently is green or pleasant or for human beings home. Whoever dreamed that had not, you thought, experienced the earth. We needed to rewrite in revenge the world that wrote us. My parents drove from the Sierras, Bishop, to the almost city of their parents, carved from desert, Bakersfield. To get anywhere, you had to cross the Mojave Desert. It was World War II. In the Sierras, my father was a big shot. He said it's better to be a big fish in a little pond. The government didn't draft, even refused to enlist rich farmers. So to my mother's dismay, night after night in bars, drunk, wronged, he fought soldiers who had called him a coward. They drove their gorgeous Lincoln Zephyr across the steaming Mojave at night. Half car sick, I was in the back seat, inside, protected, unprotected. Phantasmagoric, enormous tumbleweeds in the empty landscape rolled aimlessly outside the speeding car. The second poem is called Mourning, that I'll read. It's called Mourning What We Thought We Were. We were born into an amazing experiment. At least we thought we were. We knew there was no escaping human nature. My grandmother taught me that. My own pitiless nature taught me that. But we exist inside an order, I thought, of which history is the mere shadow. Every serious work of art about America has the same theme. America is a great idea. The reality leaves something to be desired. Bakersfield. Marian Anderson, the first great Black classical contralto, whom the Daughters of the American Revolution would not allow to sing in an unsegregated Constitution Hall, who then was asked by Eleanor Roosevelt to sing before thousands at the Lincoln Memorial, was later refused a room at the Padre Hotel, Bakersfield. My mother's disgust as she told me this. It confirmed her judgment about what she never could escape, where she lived out her life. My grandmother's fury when at the age of 7 or 8, I had eaten at the home of a Black friend. The forced camps at the end of the Grapes of Wrath were outside Bakersfield. When I was a kid, Okie was still a common term of casual derision and contempt. So it was up to us, born in Bakersfield, to carve a new history, of which history is the mere shadow. To further the history of the spirit is our work. Therefore, thank you, Lord, whose bounty proceeds by paradox, for showing us we have failed to change. Dark Night, December 1st, 2016. White supremacists once again in America are acceptable, respectable. America. Bakersfield was first swamp, then desert. We are sons of the desert who cultivate the top half inch of soil. The last poem I'll read is the last poem in the book. It's a poem indebted. Well, it mentions a phrase in Farsi, and I'm indebted to that, to the poet Kava Akbar. It's a poem about wanting to reconnect with figures from one's past that one has written, in fact, attempting to escape. Well, you'll see. It's called On My 78th. I'm now 82. On my 78th. There will be just 2 at table tonight, though to accommodate all those who have so mattered and still so matter in my life. The table will be very long, though empty. I say to you, Jala Shoma Hali, your place is empty. Your place at my table is saved for you. I tried to construct in my soul your necessary grave because you were dead, because you were flawed, preoccupied, you got concentrated on your soul. Too often you were cruel. As I shoveled dirt onto your body, the dirt refused soon to cling. Those who torment because you know you love them refuse to remain buried. Is anything ever forgotten? Actually forgiven? Shovel in hand, I saw how little I had known you. Tonight, I abjure the wisdom, the illusion of forgetting. Come, give up silence. Intolerable the fiction, the rest is silence. To the dead, to the living, your place is empty. Thanks.
Voila.
You're back.
I'm back.
Two of you are back.
Wonderful. Wonderful, gentlemen. Can I ask? I want to start off very quickly. Frank, I really like that line, and I wonder how Lee read it. Um, we exist inside an order in which history is a mere shadow,
Hmm.
which sounds aspirational. Some might argue we exist inside an order in which history is destiny. And I feel like that there's an interesting tension where writers such as yourselves exist, i.e., there's the possibility of language being able to kind of um, shape our destiny and truly make history um, a shadow. I'm curious about about history as destiny versus history as a shadow.
Lee.
That I was going to say it's,
In the poet's role, I should say, yeah.
you know, it's a great question. I wanted to defer to Frank only because I was also just rolling around those last lines of that last poem he read. I think maybe Major and I had a similar, or I can't speak for Major, but it's pretty visceral, that poem. To the dead, to the living, your place is empty. As destiny versus shadow, I think books could probably be written about that question, or maybe that's what poets lean into or write into, or those questions about where our histories, known and unknown, impact us 100 or 200 or 300 years before us, and how the language that we write or that we are a part of, our time, might impact others down the road. And I mean, this is one way of saying, Major, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that in some of the best poems that I love, they're grappling with that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's less of a question, more of a provocation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have that wonderful line. If the most honest, saying the most honest thing in your life, for example, feels like that could be a space of transformation for not just the person speaking, but a potential audience. And in that case, history doesn't become destiny. History becomes something that hopefully we can affect change as a result of having that kind of clear-eyed and clear vocal honesty. I was so intrigued by your line, that line, and what came afterwards was something about flesh and bone, and somehow the voice and what emerges from us as writers having a certain kind of corporality to it, that it becomes inevitable not to kind of kind of confront and run into the truths that you bear witness, which, by the way, thank you for your poems, Lee. Really beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll stop talking.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know when I was growing up, I felt whatever horrible things had happened in Bakersfield, that we were not going to repeat them. You know, the school my grammar school was called Hawthorne, and then I went to a school called Emerson, and you know, there was somehow everything was going to be different, and somehow we were going to be informed by the past. And then I have to say, I've been astonished that this country has allowed white supremacists to raise their head. I mean, if you know anything about the history of America, that is not okay. That's a betrayal of everything this country struggled to get out of. It really is partly what the Civil War was about, mainly what the Civil War is about. And this country would have been infinitely impoverished had the North not won. And people don't seem to have understood that. I mean, I feel that I was naive. I mean, I really thought people were going to not just repeat the shit of the past. And boy, it's not so certain right now.
Frank, that poem emerged out of a commission, correct?
No, it didn't. I mean, it's a poem that when I wrote it, I knew that it needed to be surrounded by other poems to have a world in which to refer to rest on, and therefore I didn't include it in my last book, which was the collected poems, which you so generously reviewed, and but it's the only poem I wrote before the book came out that I did not include. The poems I want to keep, and I really had to write poems that gave some ground to these assertions about the American past, and there's a poem about Sidney Bechet in England, and a poem about the lost cause, and the book is not wholly political, but it is more political than anything I'd written, and it talks about discovering or coming up against the racism in my own family. I mean, my grandmother, who was Spanish Basque and thought of herself as Basque and Spanish, and not having anything to do with the people that the Spanish had conquered in Latin America. She was a racist, and when I invited myself when I went to a dinner at the home of a Black friend, she went crazy, and I did not anticipate that, and it's sort of shocking to realize that so many issues of American history actually existed in one's own family, and one's family enacted these contradictions and incoherences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right on, and I'm so excited to get Against Silence and read these poems, Frank.
Well, I think they probably will disappoint because they're not, they don't.
Well,
I'm not sure they come out in a political clarity. I hope they do, but the book tries to move toward the assertion that one wants to be neither master nor slave.
Yeah.
I mean, the
earth demands that.
Yeah, and to struggle, to feel that the only way not to be a slave is to become a master, is to be trapped in the dynamic of why people think they have to become a master. And
yeah, I think that idea of the role of master, I'm thinking alongside the idea of American exceptionalism on an individual basis in the family, to your point, Frank, how a person might think he or she or they are completely separate from the violences, if you will, of our country historically. And I think what's so exciting to see, especially in the last maybe 40, 50 years in American poetry, and especially in the last 5 or 10 since 2016, people in their own ways speaking against it. You know, I was even thinking about Major's poem where the police, if I was tracking that right, pull over, I presumably Major and Matthew Dickman, and they're talking about Pessoa and Thoreau.
Yes.
And sort of this shifting of energies that can be so powerful to disarm, or in the poem where you're just writing about what it was like growing up in Bakersfield, which I know is a couple hours south of Fresno and very conservative. So it's an exciting time to hear these poems being written.
Well, it's also, this is interesting to me because some people might recall back in 2006 or 7, I wrote an essay in which I explored the silence of American poets around the question of race and social justice. And I'm very happy that, like you said, in the past 5 to 10 years, we are thinking about it more directly. To have addressed this material in the past historically meant that you sacrifice the core of your art, that somehow the ministry took over and the artist was asked to kind of go into the shadows. And my argument has been the talent will take care, the formal questions of the art will even more amplify and spotlight the difficulty of speaking about these topics, but that is part of it. Like, I think the art is capacious enough to mark an aesthetic kind of virtuosity and at the same time stumble upon important truths that go beyond mere witnessing of those unsavory moments in our family. I think we have the answers. We have the possibilities of interrogating what is at times the core of our nation. At times feels rotten. You know, to go to one of the lines I think in the poem, the idea of America is extraordinary. How we implement those ideas in the face of what we know to be at core a certain kind of tribalism, a certain kind of us versus them, a lip service to all peoples are created equal. You know, I think we as writers have that possibility of addressing those kind of complicated aspects if we embrace the challenge. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be quote unquote a political poet, but boy, we need as many troops as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, also if we, expand that idea of, just the word policing and policy and political, what is political poetry? Frank and I in the green room were talking a little bit about Phil Levine and in his great poem, What Work Is, about his time in Detroit, where people were losing jobs. And he talked in a Bill Moyers interview about the Vincent Chin murder, which was a galvanizing, horrible murder of an Asian American male in the early 80s. And Bill Moyers asked Phil, who I don't think some people would think was overtly political, but he was quite political. In the interview, he asked Phil, what does he loathe or what bothers him most about America? And he said, racism, American racism, and American capitalism. And there's so much room to write about our time and engage in our time, however the poems turn out. But I'm really loving this discussion, these ideas, Major.
I think
I mean, Phil wrote one of the great poems of rage in English, "They Feed, They Lion," which was a title poem for one of his books. It's an astonishing poem.
Yeah.
They feed the lion. They feed the lion by their, by their stupidity, by their acquisitiveness, by their blindly acting on what they've been taught by their parents. And what they feed is not peace, but it's a lion. It's a destructive thing that can consume us. Anyway, Phil is a great poet of rage and a great political poet.
Yeah.
Do we have questions?
Alice wanted us to talk about books we like. So I don't. Yes, I don't want to get off that subject because I do have a couple of books I want to recommend.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt the thread because you all were going into subjects that I think all of it. I think that's what represents Right America, is these kinds of discussions, and you all have really enlightened and inspired all of us. I love getting back to books because, of course, as you know, I am a bookseller and we're celebrating our 10th year in business. So, we're still at it, but we love your books. So I want to ask a question that Roger asked in one of the former episodes because I love bringing this up. It is a question that says, where are the grounds where poetry and prose meet? Anybody want to tackle that one? No's okay, but
I think I mentioned it earlier, maybe preemptively. I always feel as though that there's the possibility of books to kind of help change the orthodoxy, usher in a new way of thinking. I mean, and this country has a long history of those books. Uncle Tom's Cabin, Of Mice and Men. For poets, we were just speaking about Philip Levine being such a poet who I feel as though, particularly writing about working class Americans, definitely had me consider the humanity, and maybe that's the big word there, is that they meet first and foremost with language that has the potential to kind of change, but maybe have us kind of treat each other with a greater regard. And Phil Levine was one of those poets for me, as well as Gwendolyn Brooks, who was just slightly older.
I think narrative is the place that poetry and prose meet. Poems, in two lines can evoke a narrative in a way that prose can, and it's the notion that lyrics somehow does not include narrative is just wrong. It was never true in the past. It's not true of a great poet of the moment like Frank O'Hara, but he's full of narratives. He tells stories all the time, and inevitably stories are partly political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where poetry and prose meet, the grounds. I'm thinking about the verb and the action where both of them are involved. There is so much movement or velocity, obviously, in prose, but also in even a lyric poem, I think. So I think about the action or the verb.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also the chronology. even if it's not marked by months or literal years. But I think the chronology of where those two things blur together is maybe a meeting ground in a way. And just to piggyback on what Major was talking about with a person, one writer where I think there's really a lot of both is in Toni Morrison's fiction, where it's just, I think, masterful in both genres at once.
Thank you. There's a couple of other questions, but one that might put you on the spot. What book have you read that you wish you had written?
Leaves of Grass.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the easy target. Sorry.
That's an easy. That's all right. That's all right.
Low hanging fruit.
Low hanging fruit.
I constantly feel envy because the books I really love, I know I couldn't have done that. And envy is a great. It spurs one to write.
Well, do you have a favorite author? Some people do and some people don't. I mean, no.
There's a poet, Greek poet, Yannis Ritsos. His book, Late Into the Night. I don't have too many books I can name where just from first page to last page and in reverse, you can read them backwards to give you the same arc of an experience. But his book, Late Into the Night, feels exceptional in that regard. I know a few poets for whom that's a bit of a cult classic. He's not pound for pound is he a favorite poet, but he's someone that comes to mind. And I'm so open about, as someone who kind of writes and reviews, I'm so open about my favorite authors. I feel mentioning anyone alive right now just wouldn't be honest and true. For us, there's probably just too many folks to name.
But it does broaden the awareness from the listening, for those people listening, a name that they may not have heard before, and frankly, someone I may not have heard before. So, Lee, do you have anybody that you want to throw in there?
Well, I'll take the bait on that, Alice, and name one that's living. Although I too sometimes balk at that. But
yeah, it's
one just on the page, but also his work with activism and communities of all sorts is Juan Felipe Herrera. He's been formative for me. And Maxine Hong Kingston, her book, The Woman Warrior, was really also formative as an Asian American or someone just starting to think about language and history and family. Those two come to mind.
Well, and I think the last question that I want to ask is, what are you reading now?
I'm going to say that Sandra Lim's The Curious Thing is an extraordinary book. It published this year. There's just an elegant discursiveness in her poems. An heir of Philip Levine would be the poet Joseph Millard. This is his newest selected Dark Harvest. I totally recommend his. And this came out this summer as well, Kevin Youngstone. These are the 3 books that are on my bedside right now.
Lee, because I want to leap in too, but I don't want to, step on what you're going to say.
Well, I'm reading the second book by poet David Campos. It's called American Quasar, and it's got artwork by the artist and writer Maceo Montoya. It's with Red Hen Press, but David is a fiercely talented, big-hearted, big-voiced poet. I'm very excited about Mai Dervang's new book called Yellow Rain. I think that is just out in the last month, and I'm reading that one. I'm really enjoying Kelly Russell Agaddon's book, Dialogues with Rising Tides, with Copper Canyon. It's just really some marvelous playful, wistful, but also sometimes wise poems that I'm enjoying. Those are some books I'm reading right now.
Well, you've just added depth to my library.
Can I? My friend Lloyd Schwartz has just published a selected poems and selected and new poems from his lifetime of writing. And there are a series of poems in the book about his mother who had Alzheimer's. They are really not like anything in contemporary poetry. And they're very beautiful, and they go over more than there are poems in more than one book that are about her. And I really want to push this book because it's called Who's on First, University of Chicago Press. Lloyd read in this series last week, and it would be heartbreaking for those poems, particularly about the ones about his mother, not to get the audience that they should have. And the other thing I'm reading that is just marvelous is Paul Auster's new book, Burning Boy. It's about Stephen Crane, and it's just a marvelous book, incredibly interesting, incredibly informed about the period and the world that Crane's writing came into and affected and changed, and then partly disappeared in. It's the most remarkable biography I have read in a long time.
Well, gentlemen, as I said before, you have enriched and inspired each of us here tonight, and thank you for gathering together and having such an insightful conversation. I really have to, applaud your work and applaud this evening. So I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to close. And
thank you.
Thank you to Major Lee and Frank for participating in Write America this evening, to everyone who turned in tonight. And thank you to Roger Rosenblatt for creating a very special series to look forward to every single Monday night. Please remember, we have the author's books, and many of them signed. I hope to see you next Monday for readings from Paul Muldoon, Paisley Rechtel, and Shane McCrae. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you the next time. Bye.